Welcome to the show, Dr. Fenwick. It is such a pleasure and an honor to have you on Fearlessly Authentic.
Thank you, Jody. It's an absolute honor to be here as well and to meet you virtually, I should say, right?
Yes, yes. Isn't it funny how you feel like you actually know people, even though you've never met them in person? I just fixed two people up, and I've never met the woman in person.
Wow. Wow. And because of social media nowadays, we get to see people's videos. We get to understand a little bit more about their personality and how they are. So when you actually get to see them, there's almost like a similarity. There's things that you recognize, maybe things you might not have seen of another person before, but we have a much more holistic picture of someone when we actually get to meet them nowadays. Before
Yes,
we
and
meet
it's
them.
such a
Yeah,
pleasure, but you forget that you've never really met them in person. And I had the pleasure of meeting somebody who had been on my show a few times when I was out in LA, and to meet her in person just made it more glorious. And it was just wonderful, when you
that's
actually get to
beautiful.
touch and
Yeah.
feel that person's energy around you.
Right,
It's
right.
very cool.
I think one thing I think we learned during the pandemic is that we can portray energy, right, through a screen, but it's not the same when we're actually face to face, right? It's completely different. But I can completely understand what you mean, right? It's beautiful when we actually get to meet the person in
Yes.
person. So hopefully I'll get to meet you in person sometime.
Yeah, I know. And thank you for staying up so late in Dubai. I appreciate that.
No, more than welcome. It's only 9 p.m. here, so we're good to go.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Um, so Valentine's Day has come and gone. And I think a lot of people put so much pressure on themselves and get very sad when they feel that this day has come and gone. And I still don't have the love of my life in my life. I don't feel the love that I need to feel, and I don't have anybody to give love to.
Right.
What kind of advice would you give that person who was really sad on Valentine's Day?
Well, look, it's a great question. Relationships and the types of relationships have changed significantly in today's world. Thanks to social media, changing social norms, etc. So there are more people nowadays that are, an increasing number of people that are now single. They don't have a relationship, and not only that, people don't want a fixed relationship anymore. A lot of people nowadays, they choose to be in some other kind of form of connection,
Hmm.
which doesn't always mean a committed connection, right? Sometimes it can be a situationship. I think we're seeing situationships severely on the rise, right? A lot of people just having multiple ways of, being with different people and feeling like they are emotionally connected, but not really giving themselves 100%. So I even think for those people, not just for the people that are alone and don't have a relationship, I think with Valentine's Day, people are just kind of pushed into this thinking like, oh, I don't have someone, and so therefore I must be alone, I must be sad, there's something wrong with me that I don't have a relationship, right? And I think we need to move away from that. And the other thing about Valentine's Day is that, it's just one day. Why should one day be a reflection of your love for somebody, right?
I
It's a
agree.
nice moment to kind of reinforce the love with someone that you have. But I think because we don't always have someone that we can do that with, it's a moment, like you said, it's here, but it's gone because a lot of people kind of like, I'm gonna love myself. I'm gonna have tea with my cat on the sofa. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
I
yeah,
I have
yeah.
I got divorced about 21, 22 years ago, and I remember my ex-husband had my daughters during winter break, and my birthday's 2 days after Christmas. And my birthday was something that I love celebrating. My parents made a big deal about it. And I found myself being alone many times for my birthday because I didn't want to be with somebody that I wasn't enjoying, just to have somebody there that started teaching me. I never had a problem being alone, but being alone in your 40s with children, and that was really difficult. And I went away one year all by myself. I
Wow.
went to one of those clubs, Club Med, that's what it was.
Right, right. Where you go with other singles and people, oh, not just singles per se, but to meet other people, right? That's the whole Club Meta idea. I think that's what
Right,
it
but I
is.
had never gone away by myself.
Ah,
And
okay.
I had to lie to my kids so they wouldn't worry. Like, Mom, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm meeting a friend and I'm going away for a week. It was a great experience. So, to your
Okay.
point, It's
Yeah,
okay. Don't put that pressure on yourself because I did it. I lived through it. And it's not worth it because it is just one day, whether it is your birthday or it's New Year's Eve or Christmas or whatever it is that you celebrate. But it is hard when you see all this stuff in the news and people getting roses at work and so on. It's
right.
hard to manage those feelings sometimes.
It is. And I think, look, the other thing is that we live now in a society where more people are becoming focused on themselves, right? So it's not just the only the self-love and the self-care perspective. There's a lot of people that have been in some bad relationships and they've just given up, right? And now they're choosing for themselves. And I think there's a huge difference between being lonely and being alone and being okay being alone. And society has made it easier for us to be alone with technology and other kinds of stuff that have come into our life that we can now, we can be more self-sufficient and independent. And I guess, we're steadily coming to terms with this fact that it's okay to be alone, though in some cultures there is a stigma, right? Like, how can you be alone and you're over 40, right? That doesn't make sense. People don't get that. But slowly that's changing. And so, I do see some positives there, but I can still also very much understand how a lot of people tomorrow, which is today's the 13th, tomorrow's 14th, right? So a lot of
Right.
people tomorrow are going to be like, oh, I'm so sad, but let's hope they can see the world from a different perspective and not look at it just from that one day perspective.
Yeah, and it is healthy to, with this technology, some of us have become too dependent on it.
Right.
And that's not good because too much of literally anything is not
Yeah.
good for us. Excess is not good.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
finding that balance, and I think to myself, oh, when I got divorced 22 years ago, it would have been nice to be able to easily connect instead of going on
Right.
Match.com, or I was on JDate and, doing things like that. And, that was a great connection, but I think Match.com had just come out like in 2002, which is when I got divorced. So at least we had that. That was like the first digital social media type of thing that I had ever been involved in. And thank goodness for that. That was a great outlet and a great way for me to meet. But I
Right.
think in modern dating, which is what you talk about in your Red Flags, Green Flags book coming out in April.
There you go. Coming out in
There it
April.
is. Red Flags,
Yep.
Green Flags. And I just
Absolutely.
did a reels about it, by the way, before we got on here. I was wearing a red
Oh,
dress and a green dress and asking people what their
oh,
red flags.
I didn't see it. I'll go and watch it
I'll
afterwards.
have to let you know what they say. So, um, in writing this book, did you write it because you felt people needed to be educated on recognizing this, or was it just from you being motivated to find out for yourself and share it with others? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
honestly, that's a beautiful question. Look, the idea behind the book has come from multiple reasons, right? So first of all, I think we live in a world today that has changed so rapidly. It's changing. It's continuously changing. It's become extremely uncertain at the same time, and people feel lost. Is it still okay to ask a new neighbor that came downstairs and invite them for dinner? Like, and a lot of people are like, no, you can't do that anymore. Can you still go to someone in a bar and approach them and say, hey, I just saw you from the other side of the bar. I think you look amazing. I just wanted to have a conversation with you.
Right.
And then a lot of people now say, well, 20% of women now say, well, I think that's cringe. I don't want that. Whereas 50% of women actually want the man to make the first move, for example. So there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of overthinking happening in today's world. And I think that was one of the major reasons why I wrote the book, to help clarify, because the book, not only Red Flags, Green Flags, really talks about relationship and psychology in a modern world. So I talk about situationships, and I talk about, all kinds of forms of relationships and why is it acceptable and why is it not acceptable in today's world, because people still look at the world from a traditional lens. And with the different ages that, different generations that we have today, people don't see the world in the same way. So that was one of the major reasons why I wrote the book, to bring people together and say, this is what we consider healthy behavior, and this is what we consider unhealthy behavior. But the other thing about the book, and this is, ties into I guess, my bigger purpose in life, where I always said to myself, I woke up one day, I was trying to find my purpose for many years, and towards the end of my 30s, beginning of my 40s, I said, you know what, I really want to make a positive impact on the world. And I can see the world sometimes going in the wrong direction. I think we all do for many reasons. And I said, well, how can I use psychology in a way to make the world better? And so one of the things that I'm fearful of is that we're not really using our brain as effectively as we should. So besides the book giving you the red flags and the green flags, I also give you the process. So if you want to know why you think that way, I'll help and give you a process to understand how you can change that. I'll also help you to understand when you see a red flag in someone, it might be a reflection that you are the actual red flag in the process.
Can we talk about that? Because I was
Yeah,
listening
yeah,
to a podcast
yeah.
also called Red Flags, Green Flags
Exactly.
podcast, which is
Exactly.
phenomenal. I love it. And I can't wait to get your book. That you were talking with a guest about that she gets triggered from red flags, but that's from her. Like, is it a
Yeah.
reflection of her?
Right.
So can you explain the differences and how people can become more aware?
Oh, absolutely. Look, and this is that's the process, right? So that's the book is there to give you, like, for people that just want I just quickly want to know what's healthy and unhealthy, you go straight to the book and it's there. But for those people, for that question you just posed, Jody, is how can I figure out why is it that I see a red flag and it's actually a reflection that I'm a red flag, right? So when you give that psychological explanation or the behavioral explanation, people can go back and they can reflect on their own behaviors and then become more aware, like, damn it, that's why I'm doing that. And so, of course, it's harder to change that behavior, but that awareness and giving them the process on how to do it is where I think the benefit comes in. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. One example is, and you've been married, and so you've been in relationships. Are you? No, I shouldn't ask that. If you're currently in a
No,
relationship.
I'm remarried. I'm remarried.
Okay,
I
okay, okay.
finally got remarried. I dated
Okay.
for a very, very, very long time.
Okay. So being in a relationship, being married, there are going to be moments in your life that, in your relationship, they're going to be super boring, right? We call them relational boredom, right? It happens. It happens in every relationship. But for
Yes.
some, that boredom and that stability that they have in the relationship, when the moment that things become stable and healthy, they go like, I don't like my partner anymore. My partner is boring. And so is it really a you problem, or is the stability in that relationship a reflection of their own inner chaos that's coming out? And then they become more aware and they're like, and this is where the book comes in, is like, is this truly a you problem, or is it really more a me problem? And here's why this is happening. And here's, of course, you can't provide the whole process on how to change it, because that, could take a long time to change. But you make them more aware of the fact that, maybe what you see in others is more of a reflection of what's happening in your internal context. And that's why that book is there, to help people become more reflective of their own behaviors, right? Because in today's world, we're heralded for making quick decisions,
I
right?
think
Especially, yeah, yeah,
it's so I wish I knew then what I know now. Of
yeah,
course, the story of our life, right?
it is.
Um, and those are the dots that help us get to where we are right now.
Yeah,
Because it wasn't until my mom passed away in 2021 and my dad passed in 2010 that I gave myself permission to go back to. I know you talk about trauma from childhood and so on, and how that, obviously, but some people don't want to face it.
right,
And
right,
I realized that it wasn't that I didn't want to face it. I just didn't want to deep dive into it until after my mom passed. And I felt
right.
that was now my opportunity, because
Yeah,
she had a stroke, so she was paralyzed. So I just wanted to wait until after she passed. But I didn't even know that. I didn't know I was doing that. And to what you were saying, that going back to past experiences and seeing how they reflect on me.
right,
And then I realized, oh, these are my triggers. And now I can say to my husband, when you do this, it triggers me, and this
right,
is why.
right,
So it's just, and
exactly,
it comes down to like becoming self-aware, right? And
right,
and then communicating effectively.
right, exactly. And I would add one more thing into that. Look, I'm a behavioral psychologist. Often people, when they see me online, they think, oh, you're a clinical psychologist, or you're a psychiatrist. And,
Mhm.
we have this idea that anyone who's a psychologist is a clinical psychologist. And I think maybe to make that differentiation is really important, because I specialize in behavior. And I look at what are those factors that we can, in the environment, emotional, psychological factors, situational, social factors that we can tinker, that we can therefore influence a person's behavior to perform better or to be better or be healthier, etc.
Mhm.
And so that's a distinction that I want to highlight. And I think that's one of the reasons why people love my reels, is because I give them a completely different perspective to what's happening to them. And not, a clinical psychologist will look at them from the disease model and you have symptoms, whereas I look at you from a much more broader perspective. Though we do share some similarities on how to look at the mind and, how can we change thinking patterns and stuff like that. But I think the book also highlights that a lot. Like, I'm giving you a behavioral viewpoint. And so when we look at trauma, for example, and this is a great point, right? Maybe you say, oh God, I've been traumatized, therefore I'm not performing. But I'll tell you, the literature shows you something completely different as well. Like, if you look at the super elite, not models, I was going to say super elite athletes of the world, that's something different. But super elite athletes of the world, and they're not many. So when, as a behaviorist, you want to study what are those characteristics that are similar to them, so that we can try to replicate that in other people, make people stronger, healthier, fitter. And one thing that comes up with these specific high performing individuals is that they all had a significant traumatic event in their lives, but they coupled it towards a positive sporting outcome. So what I wanted to add to this conversation is what you just said. Yes, you go back and you look at it, but framing that experience as either something positive or something negative is really, really powerful, because you can look at a traumatic event from a very different perspective, and it can become the inspiration of your life, right? To become the best version of yourself.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And I've seen it with so many people, even my clients training women in fitness and health for 35 years. I've seen the ones that say, I'm going to use this to fuel me.
Right.
And
Right.
the other ones are, no, it's just, I'm in scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset. How can this make me stronger? What doesn't kill me makes me stronger, right? So that can build, and for me, that did fuel me to be the strongest version that I could be. And I try to help other people find that within themselves, because we can change the story, and that can help you have better relationships with other people and find maybe the love of your life.
100%. 100%.
So
Right.
explain to me what a situationship is, because that's a word that you've mentioned a few times, and I've heard you talk about
Yeah.
on your podcast with
Right.
younger people. And I
Right.
love the young people that you bring on your show. They are just so open and vulnerable. I love it. And
Right. Right.
so can you explain to the audience what that is?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I love that question. Why? Because I have studied this phenomena, behavior. I call it behavioral phenomena, situationships, more than anyone else has. And so every time I have my Google alerts come up, and I have the word situationship, so every time kind of a new article comes out, I want to double check and see, do I have the latest and the most extensive version of what other people have? And if I haven't, then I'll pick up something new out of that. And so far, since I wrote the book, I haven't found an explanation that does that much more better than the chapter that I talk about. So I'm so happy to provide a little bit more perspective to your audience on what a situationship is. Okay, so a definition for a situationship is basically, well, you can call it a romantic connection without the actual commitment or that you have towards one person, so that you can have an emotional and intimate or sexual connection with someone without the commitment side, or without or labeling it as a relationship, right? So there's two ways of looking at it, because often situationships, most people find themselves in a situationship and they're unhappy about it. But in the book, I also talk about the positives of a situationship, where when two people come together and say, hey, I would like to be with you, but I'm too scared about close and deep connection, and I'd like to take my time to get to know you better. And so I'll like to enjoy the positive aspects of our relationship, but I also want to have my freedom. And so that's what a situationship is in a positive perspective, where people kind of create their own love story, basically. But a
Okay.
situationship, for most people, why people complain about it is because other people are playing them around and keeping them in the dark and saying, well, if you're being 6 months or longer with someone and you still can't define if you're in a relationship or not, that's when you are in the kind of traditional idea of what a situationship is from a negative perspective. So keeping you, like, not labeling the relationship, but also keeping you there and keeping you hanging on because you want to be with other people, but you're doing that in a kind of negative way and not in a positive way, right? So
Okay,
when,
so the
yeah, yeah,
positive way would say, you would say to somebody, hey, I really like you and I like being intimate with you, but I am dating other people. Is that the more positive way?
it's interesting because I need to kind of explain a little bit more about what's happening in today's world. Look,
Okay.
today's world, if you look at younger generations, right, and also a lot of people now in the dating scene, a lot of people are, ghosting each other. They're not really, the first red flag they see, they run away. Could be a trauma response, but could also be a reflection of they're losing. We're actually losing our abilities nowadays because of our smartphones, right? We're losing our ability to have more deeper connection and deal with difficult situations. So the moment that something gets tough, we walk away. It's also an explanation why a lot of younger people nowadays, they can't sustain long face-to-face interaction with someone when they meet someone for the first time. So because we're now losing that ability, it's understandable why a lot of younger people choose a situationship, because we're human by nature. We need that human connection, right? It's in our DNA. But maybe the emotional connection and the difficulties and the hardships is something that we're not willing to engage in straight away. And maybe it's just too much from the beginning, from the onset. So when two people openly say, well, look, I like to be with you, I like to hang out with you, I like to be intimate with you, but I'm okay with you seeing other people, you're okay with me seeing other people, then that's a positive one. Another example of a positive situationship is, it's almost like having your cake and eating it too, is where you say, well, I want to have all the great things about being in a relationship, and all the things that I don't like about it, I'm going to keep it away. And you kind of negotiate that. So that's why in the book I call it creating your own love story,
Right.
basically, through a situationship. Yeah, molding it to your own personal desires. But then over time, what happens is you leave, maybe you get a job somewhere, you say goodbye, no hard feelings, right? And people in the situationship might be okay with that. Or what we're now seeing as a new trend, because again, having too much emotional and deep connection can be very scary for a lot of younger people nowadays, that there's something now called the mutually exclusive situationship, where you both say to each other, I'm okay for you to see another person and sleep with them, but you don't do it. You only sleep with each other. So it's kind of like a next step towards something that is more exclusive without actually kind of naming it as exclusive.
Okay, so they're sleeping together, but they can also see other people.
That's a situationship. Yeah.
The mutually exclusive is that they're exclusively seeing each other.
It's interesting. So it is where, because you can also be in a relationship and have an open relationship, right? What they call
Right.
it. Right. That can be something else. So there's different, and in the book, I go into the different degrees and
I love that.
I explain the differences between these different terminologies. But in terms of a situationship, from a positive perspective, people come together and say, like, I like being with you. And a lot of people nowadays, they complain, my schedule's so busy. If you don't fit in my schedule, I don't know if you've seen the TikTok or reel. It's like, I sleep 8 hours a day. I work 8 hours a day. I go to the gym 2 hours a day. If I'm texting you, it means I like you, right? That's the mindset of today, that, if you're going to fit into my schedule and I want to be with you, then great. But if you're going to give me the drama, then I don't want it. So it's kind of like, can we fit each other's desires together? But those things that we might not like about each other, well, we'll keep it away. We won't get too committed. We also want to see other people and have that flexibility and freedom. And so that's why a lot of people are actively choosing to be in a situationship, from a kind of social dynamic. What's changing in today's world, it's a reflection of that dynamic that's actually happening.
I have so many questions about this. That one of the things that you said, well, first of all, has
I'm so happy the book is coming out. People will have a better
me too. So don't you think situationships were happening back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, but
Of
we
course they
didn't
were.
label it?
Right, right, right. Of course they were happening. And,
But
back.
maybe, yeah, I mean, it was when people had many lovers, right? I mean, there were movies about it.
Right. Yeah. But we didn't call it that. It was more like you were the Casanova, or it was the mistress, or, it was the lover that you had. But, back in those days, people were in committed relationships. People got
Yes.
married because of the social pressure around it. And, you know, we can also talk about the cultural aspects of, why people would get into a situationship from a different culture. Because when we talk about, for example, falling in love or being in love or loving somebody, we often look at this from a Western perspective, or what TV and media imposes on us, what that should be. But if we look, for example, at other cultures where there are arranged marriages and there's no falling in love phase, there's no kind of that falling in love phase, and you get married to someone, it can also very much happen that sometimes people also have affairs, right? But that's a very different way of coming together, because you're already in a committed relationship, and now you're either cheating or having an affair. And so there are so many things that we have to look at when we think about love relationships. We have to put it in through a cultural lens, but also kind of like a generational and social context to better understand why things are happening and why those situationships exist. So coming back to your question, it's like situationships are often portrayed, and I'm to blame for that, right? Because I always talk about situationships in my videos as a negative, but it can also be a positive, or it could be an escape, or it could be an alternative to how to deal with your existing situation. So hopefully, we can, after people listening to this podcast can look at situationships from a much more broader perspective.
Right. So if somebody is on a dating app, or they're
Yeah.
introduced to somebody,
Right.
and the person says, my last relationship was actually a situationship,
Right.
is that a red flag for a man or a woman?
No, because I think, and I love that you're asking these questions. These are super relevant. No, I don't think so, because I think most people, let's look at the average, right? Look at the average. Let's look at the data. Most people get ghosted after the third date.
I know, I hear that all the time. It makes me so sad. And just for everybody listening, everybody, we used to call it getting blown off back in the
Right,
70s,
right,
in high
right,
school,
right,
80s
right.
in college. It was
Yeah,
called being blown off. So ghosting's
yeah,
been around forever too. And I heard you talking about breadcrumbing, and I want to talk about that
yeah,
more.
yeah, yeah.
But go ahead. Yeah. So after 3 days, and
No,
yeah, that's
on average, on average, people get ghosted. Friend zone. That's also a big thing nowadays. To kind of put you into a friend zone because they don't feel that, intimate connection with you, and they see you more as friends. So to be in what we call, whereas before it was very binary. Binary is like you're single, you're dating, and you're in love. And we dated, to kind of like prepare for marriage. In today's dating world, it's more like preparing for divorce. We're training ourselves not to be with other people because of just the red flags. And when I wrote this book, I was very mindful of, I didn't want to exacerbate this idea of like, oh, this is a red flag and run. No, I want you to stop and think, because most people are now kind of like, oh, it's a red flag, I need to move away from that, right? So when most people find themselves nowadays basically in a situationship, most people do, and not in a steady relationship. So I don't think it's a red flag if someone, or if you're dating someone and they've been in a situationship. I don't think it's a red flag at all. I think it's so common in today's world, and if you look at the numbers of situationships increasing amongst all the generations, let's say in today's world, it's becoming more of I don't want to call it a pandemic, but it's becoming more of a common thing, more than having a relationship is.
what generation do you see is having the most difficult time dating and then finding love? Because I see, there are a
Yeah,
lot of, I'm 63, I'm
right, right,
married, but I see a lot of women over 60 who are
right,
either widows or divorced, or maybe
right,
never married because they were career women and just never chose to
yeah,
marry.
right.
Or is it the 20 and 30 somethings? I have two millennial daughters,
Yeah.
and you know, they look at the younger generations like these kids, they feel so much older than them.
Yeah,
So I'm just curious if you
yeah,
know anything about that, and if you
yeah,
could shed some light on it.
yeah. I've got a lot to say about that, but I think, I think fundamentally, I think the younger generation does have, when I talk about young, I'm talking about like 18, 19 to 27, 28.
Okay.
And I think they fundamentally, don't want something more stable. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I think something that's radically changed in the mind of a younger generation is how they perceive relationships. They don't perceive relationships as something like, this is a one thing for my lifetime. I think Esther Perel said, today's world, we don't need to be more concerned about having one partner for life. We just mean we need to be more concerned about having one partner in a relationship. And I think it's a reflection that today's younger generation are starting to also, and this is not for everyone, that many of them are kind of seeing relationships as more transactional than committal, or based on deep emotional connection. Their lives are changing, right? Their lives, they're living in a world that's highly uncertain. They can't buy a house, they can't buy cars. Very often, there's a lot of things that they're being deprived of that our generation, your generation, actually got to experience, and they don't have that. And so it is a lot about, how do I survive, how do I move? And so moving to another country in today's world also makes a lot of sense. So people love to be with each other, they love that connection, and I think they're much more easier at creating the instant connection, right? Like immediately bond and make it feel real. But the deeper connection is something that I think they're having a difficult time with. And also, it's not something they always want. So if you are 22 and 23 and you want to be in a long-term relationship with someone your own age, that can be very challenging. But I'll add it. Can I add some more? Do we have time? Can I add some more on that one? Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So there's, I think, for men and women who are now in their 40s and 50s and 60s, I think it's much more easier for them to date. Why? Because it's interesting that the 20s and early 30s are also extremely interested in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And because of social media apps, and we look into the data, and I talk a lot about that in the book as well, actually, a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old is, or let's say a 45-year-old is twice as likely to get a message from someone who's 25 or 26 than someone of her own age. Right. So that's interesting.
100%. If I get any DMs, well, they're either from men that are like 80,
Yeah.
or they're from boys who are 30.
Yeah. 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 And that's what the data shows, right? That's what the data shows. And that's why I think it's so fascinating. And, and so for being older and dating nowadays, I think is great. However, in terms of finding something sustainable, I think is equally challenging, if not more challenging, for someone who is younger, because of the mindset that we have in today's world about dating. So, yeah.
Right, because the younger generation has just a different mindset than somebody, even my daughter's generation, the millennials.
Right.
And then somebody, because it just breaks my heart to hear about all of these women that are over 60, and they just, they do get a lot of DMs from younger guys. You hear with the whole Golden Bachelor, these women are all these young guys are sliding into their DMs and they're loving it. But for long term, like, sure, it's fun, but long term, if that's what they're looking for, if they're not, that's fine, because they've been talking about that for a while, and you just know that happens. And so I wonder if the younger generation is open to meeting people in person, or do they rely overall? I know you can't answer for everybody, but generally speaking, do they rely totally on the apps, or do you think they're looking to make a connection in person?
For sure. I think both. But the reliance on our mobile phone has done a couple of things. First of all, from a behavioral perspective, it's kind of ease of use. And ease of use means, look, if I can, just like before, traditional dating was, I go outside and I'll have to go to a bar and I'll have to dress up and I'll have to be my best, right? And it was
You actually have to take a shower.
Right, exactly. It was an exercise that we had to really put some effort into it. And but in today's world, you just go and sit on your couch, you take out your mobile phone, with 5 minutes, you might have a date. And I think that mindset shift has had a huge impact on how people want to connect, but also how people view other people. So if you now don't see people as people, but you see them more as options, then you're more likely to mistreat other people. You're more likely to not put your best foot forward. And so I guess the ease of things, and we have to look at it from a cognitive perspective, we're actually very lazy. Our brain is extremely lazy. So if you can make the brain lazy and you give it an easy way out, it will choose the easy way out. But again, to become intimate with someone, you have to actively go out and meet someone. And again, I do think a lot of people do want to meet other people, but what you also see, for example, behavior online, is that people often don't even want to meet people. So it's purely the psychological validation is, oh, you matched me. So therefore I got my validation for today. I'm going to sit on my couch and watch my, my TV and eat my popcorn. And I think that's another thing that dating apps have facilitated, which, is unfortunate, but still people want to meet each other, right? People still do want to meet each other.
Right,
Absolutely.
because as you said at the
Yeah.
beginning, people need it. They need the
Right.
touch, they need the energy, they need the feel. So
Yeah.
what are some of the common red flags? Going to red flags, green flags. What are
Right.
some of the common red flags that people should watch out for in starting a new relationship?
Okay, that's a great question. Look, anyone starting, a new relationship, you should always be mindful of how people treat you. And I don't only want to say be mindful of the clearly observable behaviors, but also look for the small subtle behaviors that people show. Because when we're with someone, we always want to show ourselves, in the best way possible. And so that's a very conscious effort. However, our brain can't control everything. You can't be consciously in control of everything that you do. So subtleties, I think, are very, very important. Is someone good to a service worker when you're at a restaurant, when you get the bill or you order something or not? Do you open the door for someone? Do you know the subtleties, how people will react to you? I think those are the core behaviors that you should actually be looking for, right? But I won't go too much into that, but I just wanted to make one statement before we go into the actual red flags. That look at the small behaviors, don't look so much at the big ones. Big ones are there and we can act it out, especially when we meet people the first time. Of course, we want to show our best selves, right? We're going to put our best foot forward, but look at the subtle behaviors. I think that's just kind of a very general remark. Now, I think one of the first things or red flags you should look out for when you start dating people is how people deal with difficult situations. So do they get really quickly upset? They're very stressed out. I mean, that's often an indicator of how they will deal with difficult situations with you. So, how do people deal with difficulties? I think is a major thing. Do they get very aggressive? Do they become very vocal? We can't control that when the situation puts us under pressure. The actual behavior actually comes out. So I think that's a red flag. If you see someone misbehaving in that way or showing aggressive behavior, then definitely watch out. Subtleties are or maybe another example of a subtlety is, how do people treat you in the moment? Do they listen to you actively, or are they just listening just to provide a response? For example, if someone says to you, I heard that I hear you saying, like, for example, hey, should we go out tonight? Let's go to a party. And you're like, oh yeah, I actually do want to go, but at the same time, I'm not sure what I want to wear, and I've got some stuff that I want to do tomorrow. And then the response from the other person would be, you know, I hear what you're saying, but I also hear what you're not saying, and that speaks actually louder than what you're saying. And you're actually saying that you want to kind of stay in tonight. You don't want to go out. You might not be feeling great, so would you prefer to stay on the couch today and watch a movie together? And the other person looks at you and says, wow, well, you okay with that? Yeah, I'm fine with that. Let's do that. So that active listening and being empathetic, I think, is a green flag. And if someone doesn't have that, it's a red flag, right? Someone doesn't show that to you. So that's something
Totally.
you recognize?
Oh, yes, yes. And
Yeah,
I'm thinking about all
yeah,
the relationships that
yeah,
I've been and my daughters and all of those things. And when somebody knows what the red flags are,
yeah,
they ignore them. I've done
right,
it.
yeah.
What is that a red flag to that person?
So yeah, we often ignore red flags, and we do that for different reasons, right? Sometimes we we doubt ourselves. Is this truly a red flag? Did I see it right? And so self-doubt in that case is one reason. Another reason for kind of not acknowledging the red flags is, sometimes we think we want to fix people, right? And so wanting to save and fix them, and you see the red flags, and you're kind of like, no, it's going to be fine. That fixer mindset comes in, and that's another reason why you might be, more willing to not see a red flag. Um, Another reason for not seeing the red flag is, I would say, because you might like some red flags, right? You might like a little bit of red in your life, a little spice. And especially when you're a more secure, confident individual, you might think, well, you know what? I can take some red flag poison, right?
You're like in my head. Yeah. Like, right.
I'm
Yeah, I can handle it. I like the red.
I can handle this, right? And then you go along with that, and then this is where it comes back to the first indicator that I indicated, like not wanting to see or not seeing the red flag is if you find yourself in a narcissistic or an abusive relationship and you stay in that relationship and you keep on seeing the red flags and but they're kind of maybe gaslighting you in the process. That's very dangerous. Why? Because then it starts to chip away on your own sense of self. Because if you are now allowing someone else to question your intuition and your ability to see red flags in other people, you will steadily chip away more from yourself and find yourself almost in a situation that you won't be able to get out of it. So what I say with that is become aware why you're rejecting or not wanting to see the red flags. Be honest to yourself, because if you don't, it could hurt you down the line.
That's where were you 20 years ago? Um, and so you mentioned also that when a lot of people, when they recognize the red flags, they
Right,
flee. So how
right,
can we differentiate between a red flag and maybe some challenging parts of the beginning of a relationship, let's
right,
say for
right.
6 months or 3 months?
Right, right. Great question. Look, I also say this in the book, red comes in different shades of red, right? Red
Mm,
comes in different shades of red. So we have like the severe red flags when someone hits you. My
mm,
mom always used to tell me, like, if someone hits you, they're going to probably hit you again, right? So run. And I think it's not just what your moms and grandmothers and dads advice is, but the literature is also very clear on that, right? It's hard to change behavior. People repeat their behaviors over and over again, right? An indicator of how people will perform in the future is how they perform today, and that's equally so for how people treat each other in relationships. So I think that's a clear red flag, and sometimes there are red flags that you kind of go like, Mm, yeah, I can see that's an annoying factor, and that might annoy me, and it won't annoy someone else because, again, red is subjective in many ways as well.
right.
Red is very subjective, and so I always say, similar to, well, I don't want to say give a diagnosis, but and it's similar to kind of assessing someone. You don't assess people from one thing. You look at multiple things, and if you see multiple red flags early on in a
Mm,
relationship, then you're going to have a much more higher, much more better indicator that that kind of behavior is something that is going to hurt you down the line if you don't address it now, or maybe that's something that's not easily to address, and you're not willing to commit yourself to that. Then that might be an indicator that you need to kind of move away from that, and that that person is not going to be the right fit for you. So again, different shades of red. I often say, right, there's different shades of red, and don't only look at one. Like, of course, look at the heavy red ones. You walk away from them, like the really red flags. But when they're shaded, most of them are shaded, right? So you look at different ones together, and if you see a pattern of behaviors that indicate unhealthy behavior, then you need to think carefully about what you want to do with that. Reflect on it, because maybe one more thing I want to add to
right.
that is that you know some people run away from the very first red flag, and that again could be more a reflection that they are the red flag, right? Often that comes from a fear of abandonment, and that can stem from childhood or past relationships. And so when you have that fear of abandonment, when the moment you see the first red flag, you're going to be the one who's going to run away first because you don't want to get hurt. And that's kind of the process that happens in your mind. But people don't often think about why they're running away from the very first red flag.
And that goes to your point that heard you talk about why
Right.
a lot of people choose not to date because of
Well,
that
yeah,
fear, right?
right. And I think we
Well,
should look.
that's one example of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, a lot of people now are choosing to kind of like it's. I call this the me generation, right? People are getting so focused on themselves. It's like I can do everything by myself. I can order Uber Eats. I can live my own life. I have my friends, and often people justify the fact of having a strong social connection as a way of living by yourself. Your busy schedule, you're not, your 9 to 5, your jobs, your gym. I don't have time to fit someone into my schedule. So we're justifying being by ourselves because of our lives, our busy lives, but also at the same time having bad experiences. And I think it's a good thing. It's okay to be by yourself for a while, but don't get too comfortable, because getting too
Right.
comfortable, exactly, can actually hurt you down the line. It's not good for your health. It's not good for your mindset. It's not good for your perception of reality. And the longer we are alone, the less likely we're actually going to be able to find someone and stay with that person for a long period of time.
That
It's a
makes so
double.
much sense. And that,
Yeah,
that, no, and that's what I see with a lot of women over 60 is that they seem to be, some of them, I'm generally speaking, I
right.
fear that they get complacent.
Yeah,
So green flags, we have
right.
5 minutes left. So we have green flags, and then I have one other question. So
Yeah,
green flags to pay attention to that are, the things
right.
that we look for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the common things I say we should always look for is someone who can communicate. If you look at, years of research in romantic relationships and family dynamics, communication is by far the most important factor.
Mm.
Trust, right? Being able to trust someone. I think a lot of us nowadays don't trust because of having bad experiences or seeing there's kind of that social learning at the same time. When we see other things happen to people, we eventually become less trustful of people's intentions, right? And so trust is very, very important. Building trust, doing what you're saying that you're going to do, be there for the other person. Empathy, I think by far empathy is extremely important. Can someone empathize with you and feel you and see you? Because there are a lot of people out there that cannot empathize, right? Narcissists and other people that actually have personality disorders. They can't empathize. And again, it's not people only that have personality disorders, but also some people just generally can't empathize with other people. They can't see or feel what you're seeing or understand what you're going through, and that's going to be a huge issue eventually down the line when you're kind of picking up behaviors from each other and trying to anticipate each other. Then if you lack that ability to communicate non-verbally and being able to empathize with the other person, then you're not going to be able to sustain your relationship for a long time either. Another thing that I want to say about green flags, and I talk about that also in the book, I emphasize that, it says, don't look at green flags only as, oh, that's a green flag, fantastic. No, you, as actively as you have to change, or you want to change a red flag in yourself or someone else, as actively as you have to nurture a green flag as well. If you want those positive behaviors to see repeated, you have to appraise it, you have to appreciate it, you have to provide it the right conditions for it to continue. Similar to as planting, a plant in the ground and it growing. It has to have nutrients, it has to have sun, it has to have, warmth to be able to grow. So, green behaviors or positive behaviors, green flags, as I say, identify them, but nurture them. And I think that's something that most people don't think about when they're in a relationship. They take it for granted, but eventually, if you don't nurture the green flags, those green flags can go away and eventually become red flags behaviors. So it's another thing to take into consideration when we think about green flags and
I love
positive
that you
behavior.
brought up, I love that you brought up empathy. Empathy and integrity are very, very important to me. And after being in different relationships, I figured out, okay, this is what I stand for. This is what I need. How
Yeah,
long do you think somebody, if you gave a time, how
right.
long do you think somebody should be in a relationship to know whether or not it's a good fit for them?
Oh, look, that's a $1 million question. You
I
know,
know.
you hear so many stories, and I've spoken to so many people in my life, professionally as well as personally. And you hear people come together after 3 weeks, and they decide to live together, and they're still 30 years, they're still together. And then you hear
Mhm.
people that are in relationships, and I take some of my own relationships in the past, and you come together after a year, kind of living in different countries, you live together, and you find out, whoa, I didn't know this about you, right?
Right.
So again, I'll give you maybe a behavioral perspective,
All
and it
right, we
might
have a
not
minute and a half.
minute and a half. I won't give you the most conventional answer here,
Okay.
but I would state from a behavioral perspective is go and live with that person as soon as possible, because then you really know how they are. And then you really know how they are when they're stressed, when they're actually with you, not by themselves. And so if the opportunity, serves you both to do that, I would say do that, because then you can really see if you're a match or not.
So no specific time. Okay. How can we purchase the book, Red Flags, Green Flags, and tell us, yeah, how we can purchase that, your podcast?
Super. I didn't know this was going to be about the book. I thought we had other questions planned, but no
I
worries.
know we didn't. I have to have you back on here because I wanted to get
I'm
into
going to come back.
narcissistic. Yes, please do. I have so many
Okay.
more questions for you.
So the Red Flags, Green Flags book is going to come out, I think, around the 17th or the 21st of April, which is 2 months away from now. You can buy it on all the major, platforms such as Amazon and all the other ones out there. Also, it's going to be in the bookstores because I published it together with Penguin, which is the biggest publisher in the world. And so it's going to be, I think we already have, I'm not confirmed yet, but multiple languages already. So it's going to come out in different languages. So you'll be able to find it either online, or you'll probably come across it in a bookstore, a supermarket, or somewhere at the airport. So if you do, definitely give it a read. It's a refreshing way of looking at human relationships. More importantly, it's helping you to make better decisions about your relationship. And I think even more important, it's going to help you to kind of improve the way you think and become the better version of yourself. So that's the book.
Dr. Ali Fenwick, I am so honored to have had you on the show. We have so much more to talk about. Please, everybody go watch him on Instagram, and you're on TikTok also.
Yes, also on TikTok as well.
That's how I found him on Instagram, and I just scroll and scroll and scroll because every single thing you post is so important to read about, and you're going to find yourself in there. So thank you for being educational and entertaining and bringing us all this information. It has been just a pleasure having you here, and thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge.
Joe, thank you for having me on your show. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I feel that we're going to have many more talks together.
Yes, I hope so. And for now, everybody, thank you so much for joining us on Fearlessly Authentic, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.
See you.